At 6:17 a.m., the world changes without announcing itself. The shift arrives as light through a thin winter cloud, diffused, quiet, easily mistaken for another ordinary morning. In Berlin, the streets are damp from overnight rain, tram lines shining like drawn graphite. Inside the Defense Ministry, Anna Keller stands alone in a corridor that smells faintly of paper and disinfectant. She has been awake since before dawn, reading the same briefing again and again, not because it surprises her, but because once released it cannot be returned. Her phone vibrates once. No sound, just a pulse against her palm. The final authorization is cleared. The document will go live in minutes. Anna exhales slowly, feeling the building hum around her, a controlled organism preparing to move. She thinks of history not as speeches or statues, but as rooms like this, where decisions are made in silence and felt everywhere else later. Across the Atlantic, the same light reaches Washington several hours later, sharper, less forgiving. In a windowless office beneath layers of reinforced concrete, Michael Reed watches a digital clock turn over. He is a defense analyst mid-career, careful with language, trained to see patterns before they announce themselves. His screen fills with alerts as European feeds update. He reads quickly, then again more slowly, his jaw tightening as meaning assembles itself piece by piece. Germany is not leaving. Germany is adjusting. The wording is precise, almost polite. Increased autonomous command. Accelerated domestic production. Contingency planning independent of American response windows. Michael feels a familiar unease, the sensation of standing on ground that has shifted just enough to throw off balance. He thinks of maps pinned to walls, of arrows that assume arrival times, of doctrines written when certainty still felt permanent. In a small town outside Frankfurt, Lucas Weber pours coffee into a chip mug and listens to the radio. The announcer's voice is calm, measured, unhurried. Lucas is not a strategist. He repairs industrial machinery, works with his hands, trusts systems that either function or fail. The words drift past him at first, absorbed only as tone. Then a phrase lands differently. Strategic independence. He pauses, mug hovering midair, sensing significance without fully grasping shape. By mid-morning, the document is public. Newsrooms struggle to decide how loudly to speak. Headlines choose restraint. Markets hesitate, not falling, just pausing as if listening for an echo. Anna watches coverage from her office, noting what is said and what is avoided. She knows critics will accuse Germany of betrayal, of ambition, of fear. None of that feels accurate. This is preparation, she tells herself. Preparation born of watching allies slow under the weight of their own divisions. Michael's phone does not stop vibrating. Colleagues message in fragments, clipped observations, half-finished thoughts. He responds sparingly, saving words, saving conclusions. In his mind, timelines stretch and compress. America has power, unmatched in scale, but power depends on decision, and decision depends on unity. He has watched debates stall responses, watched windows close while consensus is sought. Allies have watched too. Outside, Washington traffic moves as always. Sirens flare and fade. Coffee lines lengthen. Life continues, indifferent to structural shifts. Michael feels the dissonance acutely. The world he studies rarely announces itself to the world that lives in it. He wonders how many people would notice if the center of gravity moved. Not today, but gradually, until one day it is simply elsewhere. In Frankfurt, Lucas drives to work along familiar roads. Digital billboards update their loops, briefly flashing international headlines before returning to advertisements. He catches a glimpse of the word defense. Then it is gone. At the factory, conversations drift toward energy prices, toward rumors of expanded shifts at nearby plants. Someone mentions government contracts. The tone is not anxious, but alert, like animals sensing weather change. Anna steps outside in the afternoon, standing on the ministry steps as clouds thin. She feels the cold through her coat, grounding real. For years, her work has involved alignment, coordination, waiting. Now it involves readiness. She thinks of her father, who grew up with divided borders and foreign guarantees, who believed stability was something given. This feels different. This feels chosen. By evening, analysts fill studios with careful language. Michael watches one screen while drafting notes on another. He chooses verbs cautiously. Shift, signal, recalibration. He avoids words like rupture, though the thought presses at him. America has been the assumption beneath every plan. What happens when assumption is removed? He does not yet know the answer, only that the question is now unavoidable. Night settles over Europe first. City lights come on in steady grids. Lucas walks home under them, noticing how quiet the streets feel, though nothing has changed. At his kitchen table, he rereads a headline on his phone, slower this time. He feels neither pride nor fear, just awareness, like standing at the edge of deep water. In Berlin, Anna turns off her office light. The building grows dark behind her, secure, operational. Somewhere across oceans and networks, others are recalculating, adjusting, preparing. The document has done its work, not with noise, but with presence. And as the night deepens, the world does not react yet, but has begun to lean in a new direction, and no one can say where it will finally settle. In Washington, long after sunset, Michael remains at his desk, the building around him reduced to low hums and distant footsteps. He considers how history often appears as inevitability only after the fact, how moments like this are lived without music or markers. He types one final note to himself, not for a report, but for memory. Allies act when certainty fades. He leans back, eyes closed briefly, imagining future briefings where this morning is cited as origin, somewhere between preparation and consequence. He senses a first quiet pull of something larger, beginning to assert itself. By the time dawn returns, the question will no longer be what Germany chose, but who follows next. Morning arrives without ceremony, and with it a subtle hardening of the air. At 6:42 a.m., Anna Keller is already awake, her apartment quiet except for the low hiss of a radiator. She scrolls through overnight updates, watching interpretations spread faster than facts. Some commentators call Germany cautious, others defiant. None describe it as she feels it, necessary. The city outside her window looks unchanged, but she senses the way foundations settle after weight is moved, the slow groan before stillness returns. In Washington, Michael Reed enters his office earlier than usual, passing security checkpoints that feel more symbolic than reassuring today. Screens glow with maps and timelines, their colors too bright for the hour. Overnight, European markets adjusted with a discipline that unsettles him. No panic, no sell-off, just a measured rebalancing. He recognizes a pattern from simulations, active preparing for reduced redundancy, trimming reliance, closing gaps quietly before they are exposed. By mid-morning, coordination calls begin. Voices from Brussels, Paris, Warsaw fill his headset, all polite, all precise. They speak of exercises, of readiness metrics, of shared values. Yet each sentence carries a small alteration, a new emphasis on national capacity. Michael takes notes he knows will be reread later, searching for the moment when cooperation shades into contingency. He feels like a cartographer watching coastlines redraw themselves while the sea remains calm. Anna spends a morning in briefings that feel different from those of the past. Questions are sharper, less deferential. Colleagues speak openly about timelines that once felt abstract. There's a collective acknowledgement that dependence, however comfortable, is also vulnerability. She notices how often the word responsibility is used, how rarely reassurance appears. When the meeting ends, no one lingers. Preparation does not invite reflection. In Frankfurt, Lucas Weber arrives at work to find the factory floor louder than usual. Machines run at a steadier pace, orders already queued. A supervisor mentions expanded contracts, says the word defense as if it were another type of steel. Lucas feels a shift in his hands first, in the weight of components, in the expectation of longer hours. He is proud, unexpectedly, but also wary. Work that matters carries consequences beyond paychecks. News cycles intensify as the day advances. Panels fill with analysts tracing lines backward through decades of alliance. Michael listens with half an ear, focusing instead on incoming data. Shipping insurers adjust premiums. Logistics firms reroute contingency pathways. These are not reactions to Germany alone, he knows, but to the signal embedded in the choice. If one pillar prepares to stand alone, others must consider the same posture. Anna steps outside during a brief pause, letting the cold sharpen her thoughts. She watches pedestrians cross the street, heads down, lives intact. The ordinariness feels fragile, a thin layer over something heavier. She wonders how much of security is perception, how long stability persists once its story changes. Her phone buzzes again, this time a message from an old counterpart in Washington, neutral in tone, asking for clarity. She types a careful reply, aware that reassurance now must coexist with resolve. By afternoon, Michael sits through a briefing that avoids naming the obvious. Charts show delayed response scenarios, elongated decision loops. No one says paralysis, but the word hangs unspoken. He thinks of democratic process as both strength and drag, a mechanism built for legitimacy rather than speed. Allies understand this. They have always understood. What has changed is their willingness to wait. In Frankfurt, Lucas eats lunch beside co-workers who speak in lowered voices. Someone mentions family history, borders that once shifted without warning. Another jokes nervously about job security. Lucas listens, absorbing a sense of collective alertness. This is not fear, he realizes, but readiness, the quiet stance of people adjusting posture before lifting weight. As evening approaches, statements from allied governments grow shorter. Unity is affirmed, yet autonomy is no longer avoided. Michael drafts a memo he knows will be controversial, suggesting that influence erodes when certainty does. He hesitates before sending it, aware that naming the problem invites responsibility for solving it. Outside his office, the building hums. Systems maintain themselves through habit. Anna's day ends with another meeting, this one smaller, more candid. They discuss what comes next if others follow Germany's lead. No one predicts collapse. They predict multiplication, more centers, more voices, more independent motion. She feels both relief and weight. Leadership shared is leadership diluted, but also leadership sustained. Night falls again and lights bloom across cities on both sides of the ocean. Lucas walks home beneath them, the factory's noise still in his ears. He feels part of something larger, though its shape remains indistinct. At home, he checks messages, seeing friends share articles, opinions forming in fragments. He senses a collective leaning forward, curiosity edged with unease. In Washington, Michael remains late, rereading his notes. He recognizes that the conflict is no longer about defense budgets or doctrines, but about time, who can act before hesitation becomes habit. As he finally shuts down his screen, the thought settles with quiet insistence. Alliances survive on trust, but trust survives on reliability. Tonight, that equation feels newly unstable, and as the city sleeps, he knows others are already adjusting their balance, preparing for a world that may not wait. Daybreak returns thin and colorless, and with a pressure that feels heavier than the hours before. Anna Keller wakes to muted city sounds, delivery trucks exhaling, footsteps echoing, radios murmuring through apartment walls. Overnight messages confirm what she sensed yesterday. Germany's choice has become reference, not exception. Other ministries ask questions framed as coordination, but weighted with intent. She dresses slowly, aware that routine now disguises momentum. In the mirror, she sees resolve without triumph, certainty without comfort, a recognition that once movement begins, stillness becomes impossible again. The day feels narrower, sharper, and unwilling to yield to hesitation. In Washington, Michael Reed stands beneath fluorescent light that never warms, listening to a briefing stripped of optimism. Charts glide past showing elongated timelines, response windows thinning like ice in spring. He notices how often silence replaces agreement. Colleagues speak carefully, avoiding blame, avoiding certainty. Michael understands a flaw now named indirectly. Speed without cohesion falters. Power delayed becomes permission lost. As the meeting ends, he gathers his notes with deliberate calm, knowing analysis alone cannot restore trust once others decide waiting is riskier than acting. The realization settles quietly, altering every assumption he once treated as fixed today. Now, Frankfurt feels busier, louder, as if the city itself leans forward. Lucas Weber works through the afternoon without pause, hands moving automatically while his thoughts lag behind. Contract arrived faster than expected, specifications precise, unforgiving. He senses pride threading through fatigue, a sober awareness that his labor feeds something larger than commerce. During a brief break, he watches colleagues speak with unusual seriousness. No one jokes. Everyone understands that relevance brings exposure, and exposure rarely asks permission. The machines hum steadily, indifferent witnesses to choices unfolding beyond factory walls. Each vibration feels like a signal he cannot yet interpret fully. By late afternoon, statements ripple across capitals, their language synchronized but subtly altered. Autonomy is no longer whispered. Readiness replaces reassurance. Anna reads transcripts between meetings, recognizing her own phrasing echoed elsewhere. Influence, she realizes, travels fastest when it fills a vacuum. She feels the weight of responsibility deepen, not as burden but as permanence. Decisions made now will outlast careers, outlast governments, embedding themselves into future habits. That awareness steadies her posture, even as uncertainty presses harder from every side. The room feels smaller, charged, as though history is listening closely. Waiting quietly for direction she knows will never come. Evening gathers with deceptive calm. Michael leaves his office to streets washed in amber light, traffic flowing obediently. Normalcy feels staged. He walks slowly, replaying conversations, measuring gaps between intent and ability. America's strength remains immense, yet he sees its vulnerability with new clarity. Process consumes time, and time is the one resource allies are unwilling to gamble. He understands now that leadership assumed is leadership tested. The realization strips comfort from experience, replacing confidence with calculation. He senses a narrowing corridor ahead, decisions compressing, margins thinning rapidly. The future feels closer than expected, pressing against the present. Now, here, in Berlin, night descends cleanly, lights igniting in disciplined rows. Anna returns home, removing her coat with practiced ease. Yet sleep feels remote. Messages arrive from counterparts abroad, respectful, cautious, probing. She answers selectively, aware that silence can communicate resolve as clearly as words. Alone in her kitchen, she listens to the city's muted pulse, considering how quickly certainty transforms into memory once replaced by necessity. The responsibility settles differently now, less theoretical, more personal. She understands that preparation changes relationships, revealing limits once politely ignored. Independence offers safety, yet quietly demands sacrifice no policy can soften. Fully, completely, ever. Across Germany, production schedules extend, rail lines thrum through darkness, and warehouses glow. Lucas finishes his shift late, muscles aching, senses sharpened. He feels useful in a way that unsettles him, aware that usefulness ties him to outcomes he cannot control. Driving home, he notices fewer jokes on the radio, more information, more careful phrasing. The country sounds like someone inhaling before speaking. He grips the steering wheel, feeling distance shrink between private life and public consequence. At home, he washes grease from his hands, watching it spiral away. The motion feels symbolic, incomplete, leaving residue he cannot fully remove. Night deepens on the American coast. Michael reviews intelligence summaries alone, the building around him reduced to ventilation hum and distant footsteps. He recognizes a pattern emerging across reports. Allies recalibrating time expectations. The flaw is no longer abstract. It is temporal, embedded in process. Democracy deliberates, while threats compress. He does not resent this truth, but he cannot ignore its cost. He imagines scenarios where delay reshapes outcomes, not through defeat but absence. The insight feels colder than fear, because it carries no urgency to rally against. It simply exists, demanding adaptation without offering comfort or applause. Anywhere, ever. Near midnight, messages slow and silence grows heavier. Anna, Michael, and Lucas occupy different cities, different roles, yet share an unspoken awareness that alignment has shifted. No alarms sound. No borders move. Still, something fundamental has changed shape. The conflict now is not between nations, but between tempo and trust. As each prepares for tomorrow in separate rooms, the question lingers, quiet and persistent, asking not who leads, but who arrives in time. The answer remains unseen, forming beyond the horizon, where patience and power may no longer align. It is there the next chapter begins, already moving, already irreversible. The morning breaks with a brittle clarity, as if the air itself has been scrubbed clean of illusion. Anna Keller stands at her kitchen window, watching sunlight slide across rooftops, and feels the weight of continuity pressing harder than before. Overnight, confirmations arrive quietly, not as declarations, but as acknowledgments. Ministries across Europe reference Germany now, not as anchor, but as precedent. She drinks her coffee slowly, tasting bitterness she does not mind, understanding that leadership rarely announces itself. It accumulates, layer by layer, until the world begins to lean without asking permission. In Washington, Michael Reed reads the same reports with a different gravity. The language has shifted again. Phrases once framed as cooperation now emphasize optionality. He notices how often the word coordination is paired with independence, how assurance gives way to preparedness. The change feels surgical, precise, leaving no visible wound yet altering circulation everywhere. He thinks of institutions as living systems, dependent on shared rhythms. When those rhythms diverge, even subtly, friction becomes inevitable, and friction always reveals weakness. Frankfurt wakes louder than usual. Lucas Weber rides the early train, surrounded by faces intent and unreadable. Conversations are hushed, practical, focus on logistics rather than speculation. At the factory, managers distribute updated schedules, careful not to dramatize the increase. Lucas feels the acceleration in his body before he names it, muscles anticipating strain. He recognizes a familiar tension, the one that appears when work becomes purpose and purpose becomes obligation. Pride and apprehension braid together, impossible to separate cleanly. By mid-morning, Anna is immersed in meetings that feel less like consultation and more like alignment. Partners speak with clarity she has not heard before, outlining contingencies without apology. She listens, responding with measured confidence, aware that credibility now depends on consistency. There is no room for ambiguity. As the discussions unfold, she senses something irreversible crystallizing. Europe is no longer rehearsing autonomy. It is practicing it. The distinction matters, and it settles heavily in her chest. Michael attends a briefing that confirms his unease. Analysts present scenarios once considered extreme, now treated as plausible. Response time stretch. Decision thresholds rise. No one panics. That is the most unsettling part. The room accepts the limitations with professional calm, as though naming them is sufficient. Michael understands that acknowledgement is not remedy. He wonders how many assumptions must erode before urgency replaces politeness, before adaptation outruns inertia. The silence after questions feels longer than the answers themselves. Lucas spends the afternoon calibrating machines with unusual care. Precision matters more now. Errors feel amplified, consequences imagined before they occur. He overhears supervisors discussing supply chains, border efficiencies, redundancy. The vocabulary of strategy seeps into the language of labor, shrinking distance between factory floor and policy chamber. Lucas realizes he is no longer insulated from abstraction. His work is a node in a network adjusting its balance, and the awareness sharpens his focus, leaving little room for distraction. As daylight fades, statements emerge from across the Atlantic, reaffirming partnership while acknowledging change. Anna reads them with a practiced eye, recognizing restraint where urgency hides. She drafts responses that mirror the tone, careful to neither provoke nor retreat. Leadership now requires restraint as much as action. In quieter moments, she considers the cost of preparation, the way independence reshapes trust. She accepts it without regret, knowing that reliance unexamined eventually becomes liability. Michael walks home beneath a sky streaked with fading color, his thoughts looping through timelines and consequences. He understands now that America's challenge is not capacity, but coherence. The machinery of power remains vast, yet its movement depends on alignment that cannot be commanded. Allies adjust not out of disloyalty, but necessity. The realization strips the narrative of comfort, replacing it with responsibility. He feels a pressure to speak truths that may be unwelcome, yet increasingly unavoidable. Night settles again, and Frankfurt glows with industrial light. Lucas leaves work late, fatigue deep but purposeful. He notices how the city hums differently, infrastructure strained yet responsive. At home, he sits quietly, hands resting on the table, considering how quickly normal expands to absorb the extraordinary. He does not feel afraid. He feels engaged, implicated in decisions made far beyond his reach, yet carried forward by his effort. In Berlin, Anna prepares for another early morning, aware that sleep will be shallow. Messages continue to arrive, each one a thread in a widening web of recalibration. She recognizes that the conflict has evolved. It is no longer about who commands, but who adapts fastest. The thought steadies her, even as it isolates her. Outside, the city rests, unaware of the recalculations threading through its silence. Across the ocean, Michael reviews his notes one last time before shutting down his screen. He senses a convergence approaching, the moment when adjustments harden into structure. The alliance endures, but its shape is changing, guided by time rather than intent. As he turns off the light, the question remains unresolved, hovering between continents, asking not whether the world will respond, but whether response can arrive before alignment slips beyond reach. The day unfolds with subdued intensity, as if the world has learned to speak more quietly. Anna Keller stands in a conference room washed in pale light, listening to allied voices converge with uncommon firmness. There is no debate now, only sequencing. Timelines replace hypotheticals. She feels a subtle shift from persuasion to coordination, the moment when intention crystallizes into motion. This is not triumph. It is acceptance, and it steadies her more than certainty ever did. In Washington, Michael Reed watches parallel briefings play out across screens, their messages aligned yet unmistakably altered. The language of reassurance has thinned, replaced by conditional verbs and measured pauses. He senses the cost of delay accumulating invisibly, like interest on a debt long ignored. His notes grow shorter, sharper, stripped of optimism. He understands that leadership untested breeds complacency, while leadership questioned demands proof delivered faster than process prefers. Frankfurt moves at an accelerated rhythm. Lucas Weber begins his shift before sunrise, the factory lights already burning. Orders arrive with precision that leaves little margin for error. He notices how instructions now anticipate disruption, how redundancy is engineered into every step. The work feels heavier, not physically, but symbolically. Each component carries expectation beyond its function, and Lucas feels himself becoming part of a larger calculation he did not choose but now sustains. By midday, the coordination becomes visible. Announcements ripple outward, synchronized yet nationally distinct. Anna contributes her voice with disciplined calm, aware that consistency has become currency. She watches reactions carefully, noting which partners mirror Germany's posture and which hesitate. Influence, she realizes, is no longer asserted. It is inferred. The room feels charged, as if history itself is leaning closer, attentive to cadence and restraint. Michael's afternoon brings confirmation rather than surprise. Allies accelerate independent readiness measures, not as rejection, but as insurance. He recognizes a logic instantly. Insurance is purchased before disaster, not after. The flaw he has traced for days now stands fully revealed. Reliance on delayed consensus in a compressed world. He feels neither anger nor fear, only urgency sharpened into clarity. The question is no longer whether adaptation is needed, but whether it can arrive before habits harden into irrelevance. Lucas senses a shift during a brief pause, standing near an open bay door as trucks load under gray sky. The scale of movement feels different now, deliberate, rehearsed. He overhears logistics managers discussing routes that bypass traditional choke points. The language is clinical, efficient. Yet beneath it, Lucas feels a quiet gravity. Preparation has crossed into expectation. The future is no longer abstract. It is scheduled. Evening descends unevenly across continents. Anna returns home later than planned, her thoughts still moving through scenarios. She reviews messages from partners expressing confidence, resolve, cautious optimism. She understands what they seek, reliability unencumbered by hesitation. The responsibility weighs on her, but it does not bend her. She accepts that leadership in this moment is less about command and more about endurance, about remaining steady while structures adjust around her. In Washington, Michael walks through corridors that feel narrower than before. He drafts a final assessment, choosing his words with surgical care. He writes of tempo, of trust eroded by delay, of allies adapting rationally to uncertainty. He avoids blame, knowing it distracts from remedy. As he submits the report, he feels a quiet resignation give way to resolve. Recognition is a first step toward change, even if change arrives late. Night settles again in Frankfurt. Lucas finishes his shift exhausted but alert, senses sharpened by consequence. He rides home past illuminated depots and humming rail lines, infrastructure alive with purpose. He feels pride tempered by realism. Participation confers meaning, but also vulnerability. At home, he sits in silence, listening to distant traffic, understanding that ordinary lives now orbit decisions far beyond their origin. As darkness deepens, the three remain separated by distance yet bound by momentum. Anna prepares for another day of coordination, Michael for another day of recalibration, Lucas for another day of labor that feeds unseen strategies. The alliance still exists, intact in form, altered in function. Somewhere between intention and outcome, the balance continues to shift, quietly but decisively. And as the night holds its breath, one truth becomes unavoidable. The future will not wait for agreement, only for those ready to move. Somewhere beyond the visible headlines, preparations accelerate further. Data centers adjust access protocols, military planners revise response ladders, and financial institutions model scenarios that no longer assume delay equals safety. Anna senses this widening beneath her daily exchanges, an undercurrent pulling events forward. She feels it when partners speak faster, when pauses shorten, when certainty is replaced by readiness. Leadership now is less about reassurance than about momentum sustained without fracture. Michael feels the same pull as intelligence updates arrive before questions are fully formed. The order has changed. Reaction follows anticipation rather than alarm. He recognizes how quickly adaptation becomes expectation, how systems reward those who move first and forgive little hesitation. The flaw he once framed academically now presses personally, demanding choices that outpace habit. He understands that reform delayed becomes reform denied. Lucas notices it most in silence. Between machine cycles, during brief lulls, the factory seems to listen. Movement no longer waits for instruction. It assumes continuation. He feels a strange calm settle, born not of certainty, but of acceptance. Whatever comes next will not ask permission from those unprepared to meet it. As the night deepens further, the sense of convergence sharpens. Separate paths bend toward an unseen junction, guided by necessity rather than agreement. No signal marks the crossing. No announcement names the moment. Yet each understands in private ways that the threshold is near. The question ahead is no longer whether the balance has shifted, but how far it will move before anyone dares to call it permanent. What follows will test patience, alliances, and time itself, revealing whether readiness can outrun delay when the next decision arrives before history seals its irreversible course.